Well, all of us, when we leave here, we will, of course, linger in the lobby. As Pastor Josh laid it on pretty thick, so we'll be in the lobby, at least pretending to check out all the options and grab our group link cards, and hopefully many of you will actually find your people, because church, the experience of Sunday morning at some point needs to be more than music and a message. And I hope that you'll find your people even today there. But after group link and after you leave here, many of you will go out and get something to eat. And about half of you, depending on where you choose to eat, of course, about half of you are not going to need to tell anyone where you went to eat. We're just going to smell it on you after it's over with. There are a lot of places, some more than others. Like if you go to Chili's for the next 7 days, you won't have to tell anyone where you went to eat after church Sunday. It's a great place, but I mean, you just have to throw away your clothes. And Hananoki, like we all know the legend of Hananoki in Clarksville. If you've been in the last 2 years, we can smell it out your pores. You just kind of lingers with you. And not in the summer most of the time, but later on in the year when we're not all sweating all the time, I do my best to try to go a few wears before I wash again. Am I the only one? Is that gross? I don't know. As long as I don't sweat through it, I'm like, yeah, I could wear this again next week. I've showered up, I've taken my wife out, we've gone out to eat, I come back and just kind of hang things back up, at least that's me. That's the gross pastor, I guess, but I try to hold on. But then there are some places you go, you're like, I might not even be able to wear this shirt ever again. Like, this is just it. You can tell. The smell tends to follow us. And it's not just about food. We all know what it is to meet someone and immediately know, like, she's been through it. And he's gone through some stuff. And hopefully your social awareness is strong enough to not say it out loud, but you're thinking it. Like, wow, we've got some serious relational hurt here. Like, there's a lot of trust that's been broken in this place, or good grief, there's no confidence, there's insecurity. You can just see it in people's faces and what they've been through, and you can probably guess a lot of their stories. And we're all that way. And we wear it. It follows us around. And one of my favorite people in the story of God is a man named Joseph. And what I love about him is that he seemed unchanged and unfazed by everything he went through. I can't say he's unaffected. I've obviously never known him. He lived around 2000 BC. But I can look at his life and see evidence of a man who went through a lot of stuff, but somehow emerged unfazed, unchanged, just continually following that same path. And it's so unique, it sticks out, because that wasn't the case for even his own family tree. Joseph's dad, Jacob, we looked at his life last week, and Jacob had his name changed to Israel after that, fight with God in the tent, or at least fight with the man of God in the tent. And while that part is really cool, it's one of my favorite. The guy that would be willing to fight with the man of God over being blessed and favored, that's pretty cool. But truthfully, that's the only cool thing in Jacob's life. Like everything else, he just isn't a guy that I tend to root for. And part of his story helps us understand Joseph's story. Jacob was known as the deceiver. He got in trouble. He deceived people, ran out of favor with his family. We talked about that last week. But he also was deceived. And at one point, he thought he was marrying the love of his life, a girl named Rachel, and there was a deception that happened, and actually he ended up marrying Rachel's sister, which he did not realize till the next morning, which raises a ton of questions. But he didn't realize that till the next day. So he's married to Leah, and then now he wants to also marry Rachel, and somehow that's still on the table, which shouldn't happen. Anyway, but he has that. So eventually he's married to Leah, and he's married to Rachel. And Leah has a servant. Rachel has a servant. Jacob has a lot of ladies in his life. And as he knows that he is the descendant of Isaac and ultimately Abraham as well, there is some family history there. You're going to be the father of a nation and all that. So there's this war between Leah and Rachel for who can produce the heir, who can produce the boy who's going to be the follower and the follow in line in the family tree. Leah gives 4 sons to Jacob, which is great. And Rachel says, you've given him 4, I've given him none. Well, there was a story I heard with his dad and granddad. I got this servant. So Rachel brings the servant in and tells Jacob, hey, sleep with my servant. And Jacob looked back and said, well, if Abraham did it, it was good. So we have 2 children by Rachel's servant. And then Leah says, well, I have a servant. 2 can play this game. Here's my servant. And Jacob just keeps nodding and giving, and producing heirs. It's a very messed up thing. There's nothing about Jacob that appeals to me other than the fact that he fought with the man of God all night long and he had his name changed to Israel, and obviously he's a really important person. But he's the hard guy to get behind. Well, eventually in that little war of babies, Rachel finally gets pregnant, and the 11th child is Joseph. And we're told that Joseph actually is the one that Jacob truly loved, the child that he loved more than anybody else. And all the brothers knew it, and I kind of get it. When you're on number 11, you're not young anymore anyway. And I've always believed, and he'll probably listen online later, but I've always believed that my father loves my son more than he loves me. So that just kind of works out. Like the grandkids are like, oh, they're so perfect. My son, my grandkids, perfection. And when you have this many kids, and we know he's a little bit older, Isaac's a little bit older, so perhaps there was that grandfatherly feel by the time that Joseph came around. Perhaps not. I'm guessing here. But there was also one more, Benjamin, the last one that was born to Rachel. But Joseph is number 11, and he's loved by his dad, but he goes through a ton of difficult stuff and somehow remains unfazed by it all. So looking at his own life, the primary lesson, that overarching lesson from his life is that even though at times life stinks, it doesn't have to stick. It doesn't have to stay with you. And that's what we find with Joseph. And there are 3 actually ways that he demonstrates this in his own life. And I want to share those with you today. Number 1, the lesson for me, lesson I hope for us, is that when I trust in God's justice, I can respond to neglect with respect. When I'm trusting God to be God, when I trust God to right the wrongs, instead of embarking on a revenge tour where I'm going to get everybody back that didn't believe in me or overlooked me or betrayed me or neglected me or whatever it is, when I let God be God and trust him to be the just one, I can step back and respond with all the respect in the world, because in the end, the greatest offense is not with me, it's with God, because I belong to him. And you mess with one of his kids, I'm going to let him deal with you. If my kid ever came home from school and said, this happened to me, I would say, let me handle that. I'm your dad. I'll take care of this. And when I trust God enough to say, God, man, this stinks. This is messed up, but you deal with it. It then frees me up and keeps me from going on that kind of revenge tour, as I mentioned. Well, in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3, we begin to see the beginnings of this struggle that Joseph had as a hated brother, as a despised person. And it says in verse 3, now Israel, also known as Jacob, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So the brothers get it. Like, okay, your dad's favorite. He gives you stuff that he doesn't give us. And then we even have this reference to a dream. And we're not going to spend time here, but there was a morning, they're all sitting around having their family breakfast together, and how'd y'all sleep last night? Joseph says, I slept great. I had this crazy vision, though. And then this thing happened, and ultimately it means all you brothers were bowing to me. It was great. Anyway, they're having that moment there at the table, and obviously none of the brothers were impressed. Like, there he goes again. I hate that guy. Like, that's the brothers looking at their little brother going, he is on my last nerve. And it got so bad that they actually took him away from the house, and they threw him in a well and faked a death and thought, we'll just tell dad he's gone. An animal got him. He's dead. But then another brother speaks up, and I don't know if it was any better or not, but they pulled him out of the well and sold him into slavery. So they trafficked their own brother, and he's gone. And as far as dad knows, he's dead. He's lost his child, all because of this stuff. So in the end, he gets pushed away and he's taken off into Egypt in a completely different country, and he's raised there or lives there as a slave. But it is a very, very grave reminder for us that although it's a little attractive at times to be that guy with a chip on your shoulder, like, I'll show you. As if we need motivation. If you're an athlete, you've played sports, that it's almost revered to have that chip on your shoulder. Anybody drafted before you, well, I'll show that team. Every time I pay them, I'm going to get them back, and they just live with this. And then when they're 55 years old, you see interviews with them, and they're still mad at those people, like after all these years. And we go, oh, a chip on their shoulder, that's what made them great. But that chip on their shoulder became chains on their feet, and they're not free. They're successful, maybe even rich, maybe famous, but they're not free. Because that chip on your shoulder will become chains on your feet. And it sounds really cool to walk around with a chip on your shoulder, but it is not helpful. And Joseph, if he had lived with that chip on his shoulder, would have never been able to be everything God created him to be. He's constantly just trying to get back. But he trusted God's justice. He said, God, you deal with the people. You deal with my brothers. You deal with my family. You know what I've gone through. You know where I've been. And you could do a much better job than I could. I'm going to allow you to do that. Number two, when I believe in God's wisdom, I can accept my pain as preparation. If I really believe that God knows what he's doing, if I really believe he's in control, if I really believe God is actually writing a story or has written me into his story, if I really believe that, then I can trust that whatever it is I'm going through has first been okayed by him. Even if it's terrible stuff, I'm going to trust that that pain God is going to use to prepare me for whatever is next. And I don't know that that means God purposefully ordains and fixes it where these kind of moments are going to happen. I don't know that I believe that God wanted Joseph to be bullied or Joseph to be sold, but I do believe that Joseph even was able to look at his life eventually and say that all that stuff was awful, but God tended to work everything together for the good of me who loved him. And well, that's a verse, isn't it? Anyway, so there's a moment where we see this foreshadowing of this great verse in Romans 8:28 that many of you have committed to memory. You found it encouraging to believe that all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And it's not that God was saying, I love watching Joseph be ruined and hated by his brothers and sold into slavery because I have a plan. It is God going, this is messed up, but it will not be the end. And I will use that to get him where I want him to be, and I will work through his pain to prepare him. That's what I do know for certain. To the point where in Genesis chapter 45, Joseph had to look back on this. I don't know that he understood this at the time, but in Genesis 45, verse 5, there is an eventual reunion with his brothers, which is a really cool story that probably don't have time for today, but it's an intense moment. And Joseph says these words, it was to save, I'm sorry, I skipped a whole, just jump to 45. I know what I'm doing here. 45, let's move on. It's online too, so no one will ever see it. It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Now, in the meantime, if the pastor had been paying attention to his notes and would have read in order, what happened before was that once he got to Egypt, he was taken to a master's house and he was forced to live there, and things were going great until the master's wife tried to seduce him. He ran off and said, no, I'm not going to be with you. She got so mad, she claimed he assaulted her. He gets thrown into prison, and all that is happening. So, okay, so that was that. Now back to where I just read. There eventually is a reunion, and he gets to the reunion, and the words that he used was, God sent me ahead of you. Those were the words that he used to describe being hated, thrown in a well, sold into slavery, and trafficked down to Egypt. Joseph, looking back, says, God sent me ahead of you. Now, if I'm telling that story, I'm saying, you know what? It's all good. Because when you threw me in the well, and when you faked my death, And when you told my dad I was dead. And then when you got me out of the well, and then I thought I was going to be okay. And then you sold me. And then you made a profit off of me. And then when you sold me into Egypt, and then when I got there and I was falsely accused and thrown in jail, it's all good. We're okay. That's how I tell the story. Joseph says, that's good. God sent me ahead of you. It's okay. God had something going on in Egypt, and he needed someone who would trust him enough to rescue that nation and ultimately rescue, and God sent me ahead. Now, he didn't have the perspective at the time. We are reading chapters and years ahead. But at some point, I have to get to a point in my own life where instead of just crying and saying, why, God, why? I just stop and say, Lord, I cannot wait to see what you do with this, because this is a mess, and this is going to be a good one. Because I have spent enough time in my own life questioning why God won't do this, why God won't do that. I read, as Mike mentioned earlier, I read about men who are accidentally resurrected as they touch the bodies of some. Like, if that can happen, and I am praying and praying and praying for you just to fix this thing in a way that would be helpful for everyone, I am certain, and you choose not to do it, I'm done asking why. I'm just going to say, God, I cannot wait to see what you do with this. Because you're the one that turns dead things into life, and you're the one that takes broken things and puts them back together. I think I have a good plan, and you won't answer my prayers. So you must have something bigger going on. And when I trust that God has a plan, when I trust that God is truly wise, then I step back and look at all I'm going through going, okay, you must have something big planned for me. And in this season of life, there's some stuff I need to figure out. There's some things I need to grasp, and there are some weaknesses that perhaps need to be strengthened, and there are some holes in my game that need to be shored up. There are some moments in my life that are just not whole, or there are parts of me that you don't have yet, and you're asking for more. But my pain, my struggle, my frustration is ultimately going to be preparation. Again, I don't think God loved watching Joseph suffer, but I do believe as God watched all that unfold, he immediately said, well, I know what I'm going to do with this. This is how I'm going to steer this, and now I'm going to turn this into something great. And then the third thing, when I accept God's grace, I can forgive even when I am forgotten. When I accept the fact that God chose me when he didn't have to, when God demonstrated his love for me, and that while I was still a sinner, God died for me, not while he waited on me to be good enough, but in the midst of my junk, God did the work and sent Jesus for me. When I accept that as a gift, then I'm able to forgive even when I'm forgotten. Now, why would you use the phrase forgotten, or the word forgotten, rather? Well, he ended up in jail, as I mentioned, for this crime he did not commit. And while he was there, he met a couple of officials, king's officials, that had gotten into trouble, and they were thrown into jail for a time. So he meets them, and they get to talking, and they're impressed by Joseph. And Joseph says, oh, when you get out, just remember me. You're going to be elevated back. You're going to be back near the king again. And when you do, or by the Pharaoh, rather, when you do, remember me. Just so that I can get out of here. I didn't do this, and I'm helpful. I can make a difference. Remember me. And we find in Genesis chapter 40, verse 23, that the cupbearer and the baker who were there in the jail cell with him, they were freed. They're back in the presence of the Pharaoh. And in verse 20, it says, now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and chief baker in the presence of his officials. So he restores them. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So Joseph has a ticket to freedom in this relationship that he built with this cupbearer. And the cupbearer is so excited to be out of jail and living his own free life that he just forgot. And Joseph is stuck and just left in prison. And at some point, it's very evident to Joseph that he's been left behind. That everyone else has moved on, and yet he physically, literally, is still there. Well, in time, there was another moment, and the Pharaoh had a dream, and he wanted it interpreted, and the chief cupbearer thought, oh, Joey, oh, my buddy in jail, I totally forgot. So he tells Pharaoh, Joey is brought up from the jail, and Joseph ultimately presents Pharaoh with this interpretation, which was what paved the way to prepare Egypt for a coming famine that they were not ready for. As a result, they were ready for it, and everybody else from around had to come to Pharaoh, had to come to Egypt to find grain, to find food, which meant people had to come before the Pharaoh who was next to Joseph and bow down and ask for food. And there came a time when the brothers came to Egypt because they were starving where they were, and they came up and they bowed down. And it's a great scene. I wish I had time. Obviously, don't even have time to read all the verses before, but there was a moment where they come in, and Joseph tries to treat it a little dramatically. Like he didn't want to tell them who he is. So there's this moment, I almost picture him just kind of, hello, just trying to disguise. And he can't. He just burst out. Tears, laughter, screams. He's like, I'm him. I am Joseph. It's me. And as you would imagine, all the brothers just went, oh no. Oh no. Like he's going to kill us. Like he's going to kill us. Because they assumed that Joseph had been dragging on this chip his entire life. He must be so mad and so angry with us. And Joseph shows up and says, dude, I've moved on. Haven't y'all? Like, I've gone on. That's no way to live. Like, we're here. We're going to move forward. I've let that go. Now, that's easy to say. It's easy to read. It's much more difficult to fulfill. But so many things about Joseph's life just stunk. He was hated. He was bullied. He was left for dead. Then he was sold. He was taken to another country. He was accused of something he didn't do. He was thrown into jail, and he was forgotten. Yet none of it stuck with him. And if Joseph was here today out in Group Link and he signed up for your Connect group, he would be the guy that after the first, typical 3 months of a Connect group where all you say is your name and you don't want to tell anything about yourself, eventually, he would tell some of his story, and he would be the guy you would think, no way. You did what? You went through what? Well, it doesn't show, though. Like it's not on your face. It's not the way you carry yourself. It's not in your words. You don't sound bitter. You don't sound like you have a chip on your shoulder. You sound almost like you're free. And in that moment, Joseph could say, because I am. I trusted God's justice enough to let him right the wrongs. So I just choose to respect those who neglect me. And I'm trusting in God's wisdom. I trust he has a plan because way back then I didn't get it, but he was setting me up and I was going to be saving everybody. And I'm so thankful that he used me in that way. And I'm trusting in his grace because in the end I didn't deserve to be saved. I didn't even deserve what I got. And you don't deserve my forgiveness, but who am I to hold that back from you when I look at what God did for me? So we're all good. We're free. And I know you've gone through some things that most of the people around you don't understand. And you probably assume that I don't have any understanding of the pain that you've gone through, are going through, and you may be right. All of our pain stories are different. And, we could compare and who's had the rougher road and all that. But in the end, your road was the roughest road that you've had. And you probably have every right to feel however you feel. And you have every right to come into this place and leave this place with a chip on your shoulder every week. And no one's saying you don't deserve it, deserve the right to have that. I'm just saying that until you're willing to let the Lord remove that chip from your shoulder, that chip will become chains and you'll never be free. And I cannot erase what you've gone through. I wish I could. I can't erase what I've gone through. I wish I could. I can't go ahead in the future and protect my kids from everything that they're going to go through. I wish I could. But what I do know is that whatever it is we go through and whatever hard stuff happens in our lives, I can choose to live my life with that stuff with me, and everybody else is going to know. Or I can choose to be free and just trust God to be God and to handle that and believe he must have something ahead that my pain will be helpful for, that will prepare me for something that I wasn't prepared before. So I know that you have every right But we also serve a God who has every ounce of grace it would take to remove that from you. And my hope is that today you'll just present that to him.